The Grand Central Terminal was not merely a transit hub, it was a cathedral of movement. Sunlight filtered through the high, arched windows in dusty, divine beams, illuminating the swirling dust motes that danced above the heads of 1,000 rushing commuters. The floor, polished marble worn smooth by decades of soles, echoed with the cacophony of hurried lives. There was the rhythmic clacking of dress shoes, the heavy thud of suitcases, the indistinct murmur of announcements echoing from speakers that sounded as if they were miles away. In the midst of this chaotic river of humanity, Thomas Reed sat like a stone in a stream. He occupied a wooden bench near the western wall, tucked away from the main thoroughfare but close enough to watch the blur of faces. He was 42 years old, though the lines etched around his eyes and the silver threading through his dark beard made him look 10 years older. He wore a nondescript grey jacket, functional jeans, and heavy, well-worn boots. To the casual observer, he was just another tired traveller waiting for a train. But Thomas was not waiting for a train. He wasn't going anywhere. He sat with a stillness that was unnatural, a discipline drilled into his bones over 20 years of service in the Navy SEALs. He could sit for hours without shifting his weight, his breathing shallow and controlled. But inside, the storm was raging. It was a silent, suffocating tempest that had followed him home from deserts and mountains he could no longer find on a map without trembling. His hands, resting on his knees, were scarred, not just from cuts and burns, but from the weather of war. He stared at a specific tile on the floor, counting the scuff marks. 1, 2, 3. It was a grounding technique the VA therapist had suggested. Count the things you can see. Remind yourself where you are. You are in the station, he whispered to himself, his voice lost in the din. You are safe. But he didn't feel safe. He felt the phantom weight of a plate carrier on his chest. He felt the ghost of a rifle in his grip. And worse, he felt the absence of the men who should have been standing beside him. The guilt was a physical thing, a heavy stone swallowed whole that sat in the pit of his stomach. Thomas had come to the station today because he liked the anonymity. Here, among thousands of strangers, no one knew who he was. No one called him hero. No one looked at him with that mixture of pity and fear that his family had started to adopt. Here, he was invisible. And it was here, in this invisibility, that he was trying to work up the courage to make the final decision. In his inner jacket pocket, there was a letter. It wasn't long. It just explained that he was tired, that the noise in his head wouldn't stop, that he was sorry. He closed his eyes, shutting out the station. The darkness behind his eyelids was preferable to the light. He took a deep breath, smelling the ozone of the tracks, the stale coffee from a nearby kiosk, and the faint metallic scent of the city. Then, a voice cut through his isolation. It wasn't loud. It wasn't demanding. It was soft, brittle, and terrified. "Excuse me." Thomas didn't open his eyes immediately. His training assessed the threat level instantly. Voice, female, young. Tremor indicates stress or fear. Proximity, close, perhaps 3 feet at the 2 o'clock position. He opened his eyes slowly, the predator waking up, though he had no desire to hunt. Standing before him was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 19, though poverty had a way of aging a face while keeping the eyes painfully young. She was thin, painfully so. Her coat was too large for her, a dark wool thing that had likely been discarded by someone twice her size. It was clean, he noted, brushed free of lint, but threadbare at the cuffs. Her hair was pulled back tightly, revealing a face that was pale and pinched by hunger. But it was her eyes that held him. They were grey, like the ocean before a storm, and they held a weariness that mirrored his own. She held a small wooden box in her hands. It was crude, likely handmade from scrap wood, with a small footrest nailed to the top. A shoe shiner's kit. She looked at him, then looked down at his boots. She swallowed hard, her throat bobbing. She looked ready to bolt, ready for him to yell at her or wave her away like a nuisance fly. She started, her voice cracking. She cleared her throat and tried again, forcing her chin up. I noticed your boots, sir. They are good leather. But the city dust, it eats at them. Thomas stared at her. He didn't speak. He had forgotten how to speak to civilians, how to bridge the gap between his world of silence and their world of noise. The girl took his silence for rejection. Her shoulders slumped slightly, the fragile courage evaporating. She took a half-step back, clutching her box tighter against her chest as if it were a shield. I'm sorry to bother you, she whispered, her gaze dropping to the floor. She turned to leave, her movements stiff with the anticipation of failure. Wait. The word scratched Thomas's throat. It was rough, unused. She stopped. She turned back slowly, her eyes wide. Thomas looked at her. Really looked at her. He saw the red knuckles, chapped from the cold. He saw the faint tremor in her hands. He saw the way she shifted her weight from foot to foot, not out of impatience, but because her shoes were likely thin and the marble floor was unforgiving. He saw a soldier, not in uniform, but a soldier of a different war, the war of survival. What did you want? Thomas asked, his voice low. The girl took a breath. She looked him in the eye, and for a second the fear vanished, replaced by a desperate, searing honesty. I don't want charity, sir, she said. I see people looking at me like I'm a ghost or a beggar. I'm not begging. She stepped closer, placing the box on the ground between them. I'm not worth much, sir. I know that, she said, the words hanging in the air like smoke. But I can clean your shoes. The sentence hit Thomas with the force of a physical blow. I'm not worth much. It was the exact thought that had been circling his mind for months. It was the thesis of the letter in his pocket. He looked at this girl, this child who believed her value was tied to the service she could provide, to the dust she could wipe away. Why? Thomas asked. The question was involuntary. Because, she replied, her voice gaining a fraction of strength, work is honest, and I need to eat today. Thomas remained motionless for a long beat, his gaze locked onto the girl. In the SEAL teams, assessment was everything. You assessed the terrain, the enemy, the weather, and your own team. You looked for weakness and you looked for strength. He looked at the girl, Evelyn, though he didn't know her name yet, and he ran a mental diagnostic. Target is malnourished, signs of chronic fatigue. Clothing is insufficient for the current temperature of 45 degrees outside. However, personal hygiene is maintained to the best of her ability. Fingernails are clean. Clothes are patched, not torn. She has pride. That was the key variable, pride. Begging was easy. Surrendering to the pavement with a cardboard sign was a form of giving up. And while Thomas didn't judge those who did it, he knew how easily a man could break. He recognized that this girl hadn't broken yet. She was bending, she was fracturing, but she was still standing. You think you're not worth much? Thomas asked, repeating her words. His voice was gravelly, devoid of the usual condescension adults used with the youth. He spoke to her as an equal. The girl blinked, surprised by the directness of the question. She fidgeted with the strap of her box. The world has a way of telling you your price, sir. When people walk by you like you're invisible, you start to believe them. Thomas looked down at his boots. They were Lois, tactical hiking boots he had worn in 3 different countries. They were stained with oil, mud, and the grey grime of the city. They were sturdy, built to survive explosions and rough terrain. But she was right. They were neglected. He hadn't cared about them. He hadn't cared about anything. Sit, Thomas said, gesturing to the empty space on the bench beside him. The girl hesitated. Sir, I can't. I mean, the security guards. They don't like us sitting on the benches. It's for passengers only. I'm a passenger, Thomas lied. And you are conducting business. Sit. There was a command in his voice that bypassed her hesitation. It was the officer voice, the tone that moved platoons. She sat, but perched on the very edge of the bench, ready to spring up at the first sign of trouble. "What is your name?" he asked. "Evelyn," she said softly. "Evelyn Moore." "I'm Thomas." "Mr. Reed," she corrected herself, assuming a formality that acted as a barrier. "Mr. Thomas." "Just Thomas," he said. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, clasping his hands. "Evelyn, look at the people walking by." She looked. A businessman in a camel hair coat shouted into a phone. A mother dragged a crying toddler. A group of tourists took photos of the ceiling, oblivious to the people navigating around them. "What do you see?" Thomas asked. "I see busy people," Evelyn said. "Important people." "I see camouflage," Thomas said. Evelyn frowned, looking at him. "Camouflage? No one is wearing green." Thomas offered a rare, faint twitch of his lips that wasn't quite a smile. "Not that kind. They wear suits, headphones, sunglasses. They stare at their phones. It's all camouflage. They are hiding. They are hiding from each other, and mostly they are hiding from themselves. They think if they move fast enough, the silence won't catch them." Evelyn stared at the crowd with new eyes. She understood silence. Silence was the enemy when you were alone at night under a bridge. Silence was when the hunger pangs were the loudest. "You don't move fast," Evelyn observed, turning her grey eyes back to him. "You're sitting still." "Because I'm tired of running," Thomas admitted. It was the most honest thing he had said to anyone in 6 months. "And the silence caught me a long time ago." He looked at her box. "You said you could clean these." "Yes, sir. I have saddle soap, and a good brush, horsehair, and mink oil for the finish. It preserves the leather, waterproofs it." She recited the list like a menu, proud of her meager inventory. "It's not necessary," Thomas said. Evelyn's face fell, the light dying in her eyes instantly. She reached for her box to stand up. "Oh, I understand. Sorry to disturb." Thomas interrupted. "It's not necessary for the boots. They've walked through worse things than dust." "But," he paused. He saw her hands shaking again. Not from cold this time, but from the adrenaline crash of rejection. He realized then that this transaction wasn't about the boots. It wasn't about the $5 or $10 he would give her. It was about the act. She needed to be useful. She needed to prove to herself and to him that she existed and had a function in this massive, uncaring machine of a city. If he sent her away with charity money, he would feed her body but starve her spirit. If he sent her away with nothing, he would be just another cruelty in her day. "But," Thomas continued, shifting his left leg forward and placing his heavy boot onto the small wooden footrest of her box, "I have a long wait, and a soldier should never let his gear degrade." The relief that washed over Evelyn's face was radiant. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the relief of a drowning person finding a piece of driftwood. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll do a good job. You'll see. The best." "I believe you," Thomas said. "Get to work, Evelyn." Evelyn knelt on the cold marble floor. To anyone passing by, the tableau was ancient and common, the server and the served, the kneeling figure and the seated figure. But the dynamic between them was shifting in ways the casual observer couldn't see. She opened her box. It was organized with a precision that Thomas appreciated. The tins of polish were dented but stacked neatly. The rags were folded. The brushes were clean. She took a stiff brush first. "I have to remove the surface dust," she explained, her voice gaining confidence as she entered her domain of expertise. "If you put polish on top of dust, it just grinds the dirt into the leather. It ruins the grain." "Preparation is key," Thomas murmured. "Standard operating procedure." "Yes, sir," she said, working the brush vigorously over the toe of his boot. Scritch, scritch, scritch. The sound was rhythmic, hypnotic. Thomas watched her hands. They were small, the skin dry and red, but they moved with dexterity. She wasn't just wiping, she was caring for the object. She treated the boot as if it were an artifact of great value. "Where did you learn this?" Thomas asked. "Shoe shining isn't exactly a common trade for your generation." Evelyn didn't look up, focusing on the heel. "My grandfather, he was in the service too, army. He used to say that you can tell everything about a man by his shoes. If he takes care of what connects him to the ground, he's a man who understands gravity." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like a wise man." "He was," Evelyn said, her voice tightening slightly. "He passed 2 years ago. That's when things changed." She didn't elaborate, and Thomas didn't press. He knew about the domino effect of loss. You lose a person, then you lose the income, then the house, then the stability, until you are floating in the ether. She swapped the brush for a damp rag, wrapping it around her index and middle fingers with a practiced twist. She dipped it into the saddle soap and began to work it into the leather in small, circular motions. The smell of the soap hit Thomas, a clean, earthy scent of pine and tallow. It triggered a memory. Afghanistan, 2012. The staging room before a night op. The smell of gun oil and cleaning solvents. The quiet camaraderie of men checking their gear. The feeling of purpose. The feeling that what they were doing mattered. That feeling was gone now, replaced by the sterile smell of the hospital and the dusty smell of this station. But watching Evelyn work, seeing the care she put into a circular motion on a piece of leather, brought a flicker of it back. "You're good at this," Thomas noted. The leather was already darkening, drinking in the moisture, the dull grey turning back into a rich, deep black. "It's about patience," Evelyn said, not breaking her rhythm. "You can't rush the leather. It takes what it takes. People today, they want instant shine, spray on, wipe off. It looks fake. It cracks in a week. Real shine comes from heat. Friction and heat." "Friction and heat," Thomas repeated. "That describes most of my life." Evelyn looked up at him then, her hand pausing on his boot. "Is that why you look so tired, Mr. Thomas? Too much friction." Thomas felt a defensive wall rise up, the instinct to say, "You don't know anything, kid." But he looked into those grey eyes and the wall crumbled. She wasn't judging him. She was identifying a fellow casualty. "Something like that," Thomas said. "I carried heavy things for a long time, put them down, but the weight didn't leave." Evelyn nodded solemnly. She went back to polishing. "My grandfather used to say that the heaviest things are the ones you can't see. Like regret, or worry, or memories," Thomas added. "Yes," Evelyn whispered, "memories are heavy." She applied the black polish now. Her hands were stained with the ink, but she didn't seem to mind. She was creating order out of chaos. She was taking something neglected and making it beautiful again. Thomas watched the transformation of his boot. The scuffs were disappearing. The scars in the leather were being filled and smoothed over. They were still there underneath, but they were no longer open wounds. They were part of the character of the boot now, protected by a new layer of care. "You know," Thomas said, feeling the need to keep her talking, to keep the silence at bay. "In the teams, we had a saying, slow is smooth, smooth is fast." Evelyn smiled, a genuine, albeit small, smile that cracked the facade of her weariness. "I like that. It works for shining, too. If you go too fast, you streak the wax." "How long have you been doing this here?" "At the station. About 3 weeks," Evelyn said. "Before that, I was at the library plaza, but they put up fences. Said it was for renovation, but we knew. They just didn't want us sleeping on the benches." "Us? Me and, well, just me now." She corrected herself quickly, a shadow passing over her face. "It's safer to be alone. Less attention." "It's harder to be alone," Thomas countered. It's safer, she insisted, scrubbing a little harder. Trust is expensive, Mr. Thomas. I can't afford it. Thomas felt a pang of profound sadness. She was 19, and she had already learned the cynical lessons of a war zone. Trust no one. Keep your head down. Survive. He wanted to tell her that she was wrong, that the world was full of good people. But he couldn't lie to her. He was sitting on a bench planning to check out of the world because he didn't believe in the good anymore either. Who was he to lecture her on hope? Done with the left, Evelyn announced. She tapped the toe of his boot. It gleamed under the station lights, a stark contrast to the dusty right boot. Other foot, please. Thomas switched legs. As he did, he noticed something. Evelyn's wrist, exposed as her sleeve rode up, was bruised. It wasn't fresh, fading to a sickly yellow-green, but it was the distinct shape of fingers. A grab mark. The protective instinct in Thomas flared, a sharp, hot spike of anger. Someone had grabbed her. Someone had hurt her. "Evelyn?" Thomas asked, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. "Your wrist. Who did that?" Evelyn froze. She quickly tugged her sleeve down, covering the mark. She didn't look up. She dipped her brush into the tin, her hand trembling violently now. "It's nothing," she stammered. "Just a disagreement. About a sleeping spot. It's over." Was it a man? "It doesn't matter," she said, scrubbing the boot furiously, too fast now. "Please, sir, let me just finish the work. I just need the money. I don't need trouble." Thomas forced himself to relax his posture. He took a deep breath. De-escalate. If he pressed her, she would run. He was a large man, a lethal man, and right now his anger, even on her behalf, was terrifying to her. "Okay," Thomas said softly. "Okay, Evelyn, no trouble. Just the boots." She nodded, keeping her head down, but he saw a single tear track through the smudge of polish on her cheek. "Just the boots," she whispered. "That's all I'm good for." "That's not true," Thomas said firmly. She stopped scrubbing. She looked up at him, her eyes wet. "Isn't it? If I was worth more, I wouldn't be on my knees cleaning dirt off a stranger's shoes just to buy a sandwich, would I?" The question hung between them, brutal and unanswerable. Thomas looked at the high ceiling, at the golden light that seemed so far away. "You're not cleaning dirt, Evelyn," Thomas said. "You're restoring something. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes," Thomas said. "Restoring something means you believe it still has value, even if it's dirty, even if it's broken." He wasn't talking about the boots anymore, and for the first time he wondered if he was talking about her or himself. Evelyn returned to the rhythm. Scritch, rub, polish. The world around them, the roaring announcement regarding the 4:15 to Poughkeepsie, the shrill laughter of teenagers, the rhythmic rumble of trains beneath the floor, seemed to fade into a dull background hum. The only reality that mattered was the 3-foot radius around the wooden bench. "You mentioned the heat," Thomas said, his voice low, matching the intimacy of their strange small bubble. "Tell me about the layers." Evelyn paused for a microsecond, surprised again that he was listening. Most customers treated her like a vending machine. Insert foot, receive shine, ignore human. "It's called bulling the shoe," Evelyn explained, her voice taking on a professorial tone that made her seem older than her years. She dipped a cotton ball into water, then into the hard wax tin. "You can't just smear wax on. That makes it dull. You have to apply microscopic layers, thousands of them." She began to move her finger in tiny, tight circles on the toe cap of the left boot. "Small circles," she murmured. "Always circles. If you go in straight lines, you leave streaks. The circle has no beginning and no end. It blends everything together." Thomas watched the motion. It was mesmerizing. "Circles," Thomas mused. "In the teams, we used to say that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. It moves in circles. You think you're moving forward, but you pass the same landmarks again, just different times." "Is that a bad thing?" Evelyn asked, not looking up, her focus entirely on the emerging gloss. It is when the landmarks are graves, Thomas said. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, filled with the weight of things unsaid. Evelyn didn't stop moving her hand. The friction was building heat. The wax was melting, filling the microscopic pores of the leather, creating a surface as smooth as glass. My grandfather told me, Evelyn said softly, breaking the silence, that the shine isn't the wax. The shine is the reflection of the light off the wax. If the surface is rough, the light scatters. It gets lost. If the surface is smooth, the light bounces back. It returns. She looked up at him then, her grey eyes piercing. Maybe you just need to smooth out the surface, Mr. Thomas, so the light can come back. Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. It was a physical obstruction. This girl, with her dirt-stained fingers and oversized coat, was dismantling his nihilism with shoe polish philosophy. "You're a philosopher, Evelyn," he said, forcing a weak smile. "I'm just a girl with a box," she countered, "but I know that if you keep rubbing the same spot too hard without adding water, you burn the leather. You need balance, friction and relief, wax and water." She tapped the boot. "The base coat is done. Now the mirror shine." She worked with a speed and precision that was akin to a field medic dressing a wound. She breathed on the leather, her warm breath fogging the surface for a split second before buffing it furiously with a soft chamois cloth. Snap, snap. She popped the cloth like a whip, a sound that echoed sharply. "Look," she said, pulling back. Thomas looked down. The boot didn't look like leather anymore. The toe cap looked like black obsidian. He could see the reflection of the station lights in it. He could see the reflection of the bench. He could even see a distorted, small reflection of his own face. It was perfect. "That," Thomas said, genuine admiration in his voice, "is the best shine I have ever seen, and I've stood inspection for admirals." Evelyn beamed. It was the first time he had seen a full smile on her face. It transformed her. For a second, the hunger and the fear vanished, and she was just a teenager, proud of a job well done. "It'll hold for a week if you don't kick rocks," she said, packing up her tins. "Water will roll right off it." "How much?" Thomas asked, reaching for his wallet. Evelyn hesitated. The market rate was $5, maybe $7 for a shine like this. But she was desperate. $5? She asked, her voice turning into a question, afraid she was asking too much. Thomas opened his wallet. He bypassed the singles and the fives. He pulled out a $20 bill. "No, sir, I don't have change for—" "Keep it," Thomas said, pressing the bill into her hand. Evelyn stared at the money. That's too much. I can't accept charity, I told you." "It's not charity," Thomas said firmly. "That was a masterclass job. In the real world, you pay a premium for expertise. You're an expert, Evelyn. Don't undervalue your labor." She looked at the bill, her fingers closing around it tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." She stood up, her knees cracking slightly. She picked up her box. I should go, before the guards come around." "Wait," Thomas said again. He stood up. He was tall, 6'2", and his sudden verticality made Evelyn take a step back instinctively. He saw her flinch, and he hated himself for being a source of fear. "I'm going to get some coffee," Thomas said, gesturing toward a deli counter across the concourse. "And a sandwich. I hate eating alone. It reminds me of bad places." It was a lie. He preferred eating alone. But he had heard her stomach growl during the shine, a low, angry rumble that she had tried to cover with coughing. "Will you join me?" he asked. "As a favor, to keep an old soldier company." Evelyn looked at the deli. She looked at the sandwiches displayed in the glass case, stacks of roast beef, turkey, cheese. She licked her lips unconsciously. I shouldn't," she said. "People like me, we aren't supposed to sit in the cafes." "You're with me," Thomas said. "And today you're not people like you. You're my guest, mission critical." She looked at him, searching for the trick. Finding none, she nodded. "Okay," she whispered. But just for a minute. They sat at a small, round metal table near the edge of the dining concourse. Thomas had bought enough food to feed a fire team. 2 large turkey sandwiches, a bag of chips, 2 apples, a bottle of water, and 2 black coffees. He pushed the majority of the food toward her. "I'm not that hungry," he lied. "My eyes were bigger than my stomach. Hate to see it go to waste." Evelyn didn't attack the food. That was what broke Thomas's heart the most. A starving animal snaps at food. A human being who has been starving for a long time tries to maintain dignity. She unwrapped the sandwich slowly, her hands trembling. She took a small bite, chewed thoroughly, and swallowed. She closed her eyes for a second as the food hit her empty stomach. "Is it good?" Thomas asked, sipping his coffee. "It's wonderful," she said softly. "Real turkey, not processed." "Evelyn," Thomas asked gently, "where do you stay at night?" She paused, the sandwich halfway to her mouth. The walls went up again, here and there. It's better not to have a routine. Routines get you found. Found by who? By people who think a girl alone is property, she said, her voice flat. Or by social services who want to put you in a group home. I've been in those. They're worse than the street. At least on the street, the monsters have the decency to look like monsters. In the homes, sometimes they smile. Thomas gripped his coffee cup so hard, the cardboard sleeve crinkled. He knew about broken systems. He had been part of a massive bureaucratic machine that chewed up young men and spit them out with a handful of pills and a pat on the back. "Where are your parents?" "Mum died when I was 10, Evelyn said, taking another bite. "Dad left before I was born. It was just me and Grandpa. When he died, the landlord didn't care about grief. He cared about rent. I was 17, couldn't sign a lease, couldn't get a job without an address, couldn't get an address without a job. The circle again, right, Mr. Thomas?" "The circle," Thomas agreed. "A catch-22. "What's that?" "A military term," Thomas explained. "It means a situation where the only solution is denied by a circumstance inherent in the problem. You need glasses to see, but you can't find your glasses because you can't see." Evelyn chuckled, a dry sound. "That's my life. A catch-22. She looked at his hands, resting on the table. She noticed the scar running from his thumb to his wrist. "And you?" she asked, turning the tables. "You have a family?" Thomas looked away, toward the departure board. The letters flipped rapidly, click, 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 changing destinations. "I have a wife," Thomas said. "Sarah, and a daughter. Lily, she's 7. Evelyn's eyes widened. "You have a little girl? Then, why are you here? Alone?" "Because I'm poison, Evelyn," Thomas said. The words tumbled out before he could check them. "I came back from overseas, but I didn't come back right. I wake up screaming. I break things. I forget to pick her up from school because I'm sitting in a parking lot, scanning for IEDs in the trash cans. Sarah, she tries. God, she tries. But I see the fear in her eyes. I see her shielding Lily from me." He looked at Evelyn, his eyes wet. "A father is supposed to protect his family. What do you do when the thing they need protection from is you?" Evelyn stopped eating. She wiped her mouth with a napkin, her movements deliberate. "You think leaving them is protecting them?" she asked. "I think removing the threat is the tactical solution," Thomas said, his voice cold and analytical. "Neutralize the danger." "You're not a bomb, Mr. Thomas," Evelyn said fiercely. "I feel like one. Tick, tick, tick." "My grandfather," Evelyn said, leaning forward. "He had the shakes too, from Korea. He used to scream at night. Sometimes he didn't know who I was, but..." She reached out and, with a bravery that stunned him, placed her small, rough hand over his scarred fist. "But he was the only person who ever loved me," she said. "If he had left, if he had neutralized himself, I would have been alone 5 years earlier. Even when he was broken, he was my anchor. You think your daughter wants a hero? She just wants her dad. Even a sad dad is better than a ghost. Thomas stared at her hand on his. It was warm. It was real. It wasn't a phantom. You don't know what I've done, Thomas whispered. I don't care, Evelyn said. I know you bought a sandwich for a stranger. That's who you are right now. That's the only data point that matters. Data point. She was smart. She picked up words and used them. She was a survivor. Thomas took a ragged breath. For the first time all day, the tight band around his chest loosened just a fraction. Eat your apple, Thomas said, his voice thick. It's good for the teeth. The moment of peace was shattered by a shadow falling across their table. Thomas felt the presence before he saw it. The air pressure changed. The ambient noise of the station seemed to dip. His instincts, dormant for the last hour, snapped awake like a rubber band. He looked up. Standing there was a man. He was young, maybe mid-20s, wearing a flashy puffer jacket that looked expensive, but fake. He had a thin mustache and eyes that darted around nervously, looking for authority figures. He wasn't a soldier, he was a scavenger, a hyena. Evelyn froze. Her hand retracted from Thomas's like she had been burned. She shrank into her coat, making herself small. Well, well, the man said, his voice an oily sneer. Evie, moving up in the world, dining with the executives. Leave me alone, Marcus, Evelyn whispered, staring at the table. Leave you alone? Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's not how it works, Evie. This is my sector. You shine shoes on the West Concourse, you pay the tax. We talked about this. He reached out and grabbed Evelyn's shoulder. His grip was tight, possessive. Thomas saw Evelyn wince. He saw the flash of pain in her eyes, the same pain that matched the bruise on her wrist. You holding out on me? Marcus hissed. I saw the guy give you cash. Don't lie to me. Thomas sat perfectly still. In his mind, the station vanished. The civilians vanished. The table vanished. There were only 2 points in the universe, himself and the threat. Threat assessment male. 5'10", 170 lbs. Untrained. Posture dominant but sloppy. Right hand in pocket, potential weapon. Knife, but likely just posturing. Focus is on the victim, not the perimeter. Thomas didn't stand up, he didn't shout. He simply picked up his coffee cup, took a calm sip, and set it down with a deliberate clink. Let go of her, Thomas said. His voice was not loud. It was a low baritone, vibrating with a subsonic frequency that usually preceded an airstrike. It was the voice of a man who did not need to shout to be heard. Marcus looked at Thomas, assessing the old man. He saw the grey in the beard, the tired eyes. He didn't see the wolf. Stay out of this, old-timer, Marcus spat. This is street business. Go catch your train. I said, Thomas repeated, his eyes locking onto Marcus's pupils. Let go of her, or I will break the wrist that is touching her. He said it as casually as one might order a weather report. There was no anger, only a statement of fact. Marcus hesitated. He looked at Thomas's eyes. He expected to see fear or indignation. Instead, he saw a void. He saw a man who had looked into the abyss and was comfortable there. Marcus's hand loosened slightly on Evelyn's shoulder. You think you're tough? Marcus sneered, trying to save face. You don't know who you're messing with. I run this hall. You run nothing, Thomas said, slowly standing up. As he rose, he seemed to expand. His shoulders squared. His chest expanded. The slump of the depressed veteran was gone, replaced by the towering posture of a chief petty officer. He stepped around the table, placing himself physically between Evelyn and Marcus. You are a predator feeding on the weak, Thomas said, stepping into Marcus's personal space. But you made a mistake. She is not weak, and she is not alone. Marcus pulled his hand out of his pocket. He held a small switchblade. He didn't open it, but the threat was clear. Back off, Marcus said, his voice cracking slightly. Thomas looked at the knife hand. He didn't flinch. He actually smiled, a cold, terrifying smile. "Son," Thomas said softly, "if you pull that blade, you will have to use it. And if you use it, I will take it from you, and I will ensure you never use that hand for anything more complex than waving goodbye. Do we understand each other?" The air between them crackled. Passers-by were starting to notice. A security guard in the distance turned his head. Marcus looked at the knife in his pocket, then at Thomas's massive hands, then at the cold, dead eyes of the soldier. The primitive part of his brain, the lizard brain that sensed true danger, screamed, "Run!" He took a step back, sneering to cover his retreat. "Whatever," Marcus muttered. "She ain't worth the trouble. Keep the change, bum." He turned and melted quickly into the crowd, looking over his shoulder once to make sure the giant wasn't following. Thomas watched him go until he was out of sight. Threat neutralized. He exhaled, the adrenaline leaving his system, leaving him shaking slightly. He turned back to Evelyn. She was staring at him with wide, shocked eyes. She wasn't looking at him like a customer anymore. She was looking at him like he was a mountain that had just moved. "Are you okay?" Thomas asked, his voice returning to its gentle rumble. "You," Evelyn stammered. "He had a knife." "I know he did." "I know," Thomas said. "You could have been hurt." "I've been hurt before," Thomas said. He sat back down, the fatigue rushing back in. "It's not the getting hurt that scares me, Evelyn. It's the not doing anything." Evelyn looked at the empty space where Marcus had stood. For months, that man had been the monster under her bed, the tax collector of her misery. And Thomas had dismissed him with a few words and a look. "You protected me," she whispered. "That's the job," Thomas said automatically. "No," Evelyn shook her head. "That's not a job. That's kindness. Nobody protects me." She looked down at her half-eaten sandwich. She pushed it away. "I can't eat anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "I feel sick." "Adrenaline," Thomas nodded. "Fight or flight. It messes with the stomach. Take deep breaths. Box breathing. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4, he demonstrated. Evelyn mimicked him in 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4. After a minute, her color returned. "Better." "A little," she said. She looked at him with a new intensity. "You said you're poison, Mr. Thomas. You said you're dangerous, but you just saved me. Poison doesn't save people." "Sometimes," Thomas said, staring at the scars on his knuckles. "You have to be a monster to fight the monsters. That doesn't make you good, it just makes you useful." "Useful," Evelyn repeated, "like a shoe shiner?" Thomas laughed, a short, sharp bark of surprise. "Touché. Yes, like a shoe shiner." He looked at his watch. It was 2 p.m. The afternoon was slipping away. The letter in his pocket felt heavier now. The weight of it was pressing against his ribs. He had defended her. He had fed her. But he couldn't adopt her. He couldn't save her from the city. Eventually, he would have to leave this station. And then what? She would be back on the bench, and Marcus would come back. The realization hit him with a sickening thud. A temporary rescue is just a delayed cruelty. If he was going to check out, if he was going to end it, he was leaving her to the wolves. "Evelyn," Thomas said suddenly, "do you have anywhere safe, truly safe?" "There's a shelter on 30th, she said, "but it costs $10 a night for the private rooms, the free ward." "It's dangerous. People steal your shoes while you sleep." $10, Thomas muttered. The price of safety was so low, yet so impossible for her. He reached into his pocket again. He felt the letter. He felt his wallet. "I need to make a decision," Thomas said, more to himself than to her. "About your train?" Evelyn asked. "About my destination," Thomas corrected. He looked at the girl. She was cleaning up the crumbs on the table, putting them into a napkin so as not to leave a mess. Even in chaos, she sought order. "Evelyn," Thomas said, "I want to show you something." He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished coin. It was a challenge coin, heavy bronze, with the seal trident on one side and a Latin inscription on the other, Aut viam inveniam aut faciam. "What is it?" she asked, touching it reverently. "It's a challenge coin," Thomas said. "We carry them. It proves you were there. It proves you belong to a brotherhood." He flipped it over. "Do you know what this says?" "I don't know Latin," she said. "I will either find a way or I will make one," Thomas translated. He placed the coin on the table between them. "I've been looking for a way out," Thomas admitted. "But maybe I'm supposed to make one instead." Evelyn held the bronze coin in her palm. It was heavy, warm from Thomas's hand. She ran her thumb over the raised trident, feeling the ridges of the metal. "Make a way," she whispered, repeating the translation. "That sounds nice, but in here," she gestured vaguely at the cavernous station around them. "In here, the ways are already made. You follow the arrows, you stand in line. If you go off the path, the police come." Thomas leaned back, the metal chair digging into his spine. It was a grounding sensation. "The path they laid out isn't the only path, Evelyn. In SEER school, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, we learned that the obvious route is often the trap. The road is where the IEDs are. You have to move through the brush. You have to move where they don't expect you." He looked at her, really studying her potential. "Show me your kit again," Thomas commanded gently. Evelyn blinked, surprised. She pulled the wooden box onto her lap. She opened the latch. Inside, it was a game of Tetris, tins of kiwi polish worn down to the metal rings, a bottle of rubbing alcohol for stripping old wax, a collection of old toothbrushes for the welts, the gap between the shoe upper and the sole. "It's not much," she said defensively. "It's logistics," Thomas corrected. "You have supply lines. Where do you get the water?" "Bathroom tap, third stall. It has the best pressure," she answered automatically. "Where do you get the rags?" "The garment district dumpsters. They throw away scraps of flannel. I wash them in the sink at the public library before they open." "And the polish?" I trade for it. Sometimes I clean the boots of the security guards at the drugstore. They let me take a damaged tin now and then." Thomas nodded slowly. Resourcefulness, adaptability, negotiation. These were the traits of a special operator. She was running a covert operation right under the nose of 8 million people. "You have the software," Thomas said, tapping his temple. "You just lack the hardware." He stood up suddenly. The inaction was killing him. The noise in his head, the static of his depression, was starting to creep back in, and he needed movement to silence it. "Walk with me," he said. "Where?" Evelyn asked, panic flaring again. "I can't leave the station. I'll lose my spot." "You won't lose anything," Thomas said. "Pack up. We are conducting a reconnaissance patrol." Evelyn hesitated, but the authority in his voice was magnetic. She packed her box, slung the strap over her thin shoulder, and followed him. They walked through the grand concourse. Thomas moved with a purposeful stride, his eyes scanning the perimeter. Evelyn trotted to keep up, her oversized coat flapping like a cape. "What do you see?" Thomas asked as they walked past the luxury shops lining the corridors, stores selling expensive chocolates, perfumes, and leather bags. "I see things I can't touch," Evelyn said. "Look closer," Thomas instructed. "Look at the shoes." Evelyn looked. She lowered her gaze to the floor. "Scuffs," she said instantly. "Salt stains on that man's loafers. That lady's heels are stripped. She walks on great covers. That man, he's wearing expensive brogues, but he hasn't conditioned them. They're cracking at the flex point." "Target-rich environment," Thomas noted. "Sir?" "There are thousands of potential clients here," Thomas said. "Why aren't you rich?" Evelyn laughed, a sound of pure incredulity. "Because they don't see me. I'm sitting on a crate, sir. To them, I'm just scenery. Or an obstacle. People don't trust their $1,000 shoes to a girl sitting on the floor." "So it's an image problem," Thomas diagnosed. Not a capability problem. It's a reality problem, Evelyn sighed. To get a chair, you need a license. To get a license, you need an address. To get an address. The circle, Thomas finished. They reached the massive glass doors at the 42nd Street exit. The cold winter air bit at them as the doors slid open. Thomas stepped out, and Evelyn followed, shivering immediately. "Why are we outside?" she chattered. Thomas didn't answer. He turned to the right, walking toward a small, nondescript alleyway between two towering skyscrapers. It was a service entrance, filled with steam vents and shadows. "Sir?" Evelyn stopped. "I don't go in alleys." Thomas stopped. He realized how this looked. A large man leading a vulnerable girl into the dark. "I apologize," Thomas said, raising his hands. "Old habits. I look for the quiet spots to think. Stay there," in the light. He walked a few paces into the shadow, just enough to be out of the pedestrian flow. He needed to check his phone. He needed to check the balance of his life. He pulled out his smartphone. He had ignored it for 3 days. There were 42 missed calls, 30 from Sarah, 12 from his commanding officer. He didn't open them. He opened his banking app instead. He stared at the number. It was the accumulation of a career spent on hazard pay, re-enlistment bonuses, and a life spent on deployment where there was nothing to buy. He wasn't a millionaire, but he had significant savings. Money that was supposed to be for Lily's college. Money that was supposed to be for the retirement he didn't think he would survive to see. He looked at Evelyn, shivering in the sunlight, clutching her wooden box. If I check out today, Thomas thought, Sarah gets the life insurance. She'll be fine financially, but Lily gets a legacy of suicide. If I stay, I am a liability. But looking at Evelyn, a new variable entered the equation. What if I use the resources to build a fortress? Not for me, but for someone who actually wants to live? Thomas walked back into the light. The cold air was clarifying. "Evelyn," he said, "I want to teach you something. It's called the OODA loop." Evelyn rubbed her arms, her teeth chattering. OODA? Observe, orient, decide, act, Thomas recited. It was developed by a fighter pilot, John Boyd. It's how you win a dogfight. It's how you win at life. He pointed to a businessman hailing a taxi. "Observe," Thomas said. "What is happening?" "He's trying to get a cab," Evelyn said. "Orient," Thomas continued. "What is his context? Look at his watch. Look at his stress." "He's late," Evelyn deduced. "He keeps checking his phone. He's frantic." "Decide," Thomas said. "If you were him, what would you do?" "I'd walk," Evelyn said. "Traffic is gridlocked. He's stuck." "Act," Thomas finished. "If he doesn't act, he loses. But he's stuck in his loop. He's observing and orienting, but he's not deciding. He's freezing." Thomas looked at her intensely. "You are stuck in a loop, Evelyn. You observe your poverty. You orient yourself to the street. You decide to survive for one more day. You act by shining one pair of shoes. Then you restart the loop. Observe. Orient. It's a bad loop," Evelyn whispered. "It's a survival loop," Thomas corrected. "It keeps you alive, but it doesn't get you out. To break the loop, you have to introduce a new variable. You have to orient differently." "How?" "By changing the terrain," Thomas said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the letter, the suicide note. It was in a plain white envelope. Evelyn watched him. She had high emotional intelligence, a necessity for the street. She saw the way his fingers trembled when he touched that paper. She saw the heavy grey cloud pass over his eyes. "That's the heavy thing, isn't it?" she asked softly. Thomas looked at the envelope. "Yes, this is my exit strategy." "Is it a letter to your wife?" "It's a letter of resignation," Thomas said ambiguously. "From everything." Evelyn took a step closer, invading his personal space. She looked up at him, her grey eyes fierce. "Don't mail it," she said. "You don't know what's in it." "I know what resignation looks like," Evelyn said. I see it in the guys who sit by the heating vents and stop washing. I see it in the eyes of the women who stop looking for food. You're strong, Mr. Thomas. You have boots that can walk through fire. You have hands that can break wrists, but your eyes are resigning. She reached out, her hand hovering over the envelope. My grandfather used to say, she stammered, fighting back tears, that when you're going through hell, you keep walking. You don't set up camp there. You don't resign in hell, Mr. Thomas. Thomas stared at her. This girl, who owned nothing but a box of wax, was giving him a field dressing for his soul. Observe. He looked at the girl. Orient. She was fighting for him. A stranger. Decide. He crushed the envelope in his hand. He didn't tear it up yet. He just crushed it into a ball. Come with me, Thomas said, his voice rough. I need to make a stop. Where? There is a cobbler shop on 38th Street. Old Italian guy. Used to fix my dress shoes when I was stationed in New York years ago. I want to see if he's still there. A cobbler? Evelyn asked, confused. Why? Because, Thomas said, starting to walk, we are going to break your loop. The walk was brisk. Thomas kept a protective position on Evelyn's left side, shielding her from the street traffic. He noticed she walked with a limp she tried to hide, probably a blister from ill-fitting shoes. They reached a small, dusty storefront on 38th Street. The sign was faded gold leaf, D'Angelo's fine leather repair. The window was cluttered with old lasts, the wooden forms in the shape of feet and rolls of leather. A bell chimed as they entered. The smell hit them instantly, a rich, intoxicating blend of tanning agents, glue, leather, and coffee. It was the smell of craftsmanship. An old man with thick glasses and a leather apron emerged from the back. He looked at Thomas, squinting. We are closed for lunch, the man grumbled. Sal, Thomas said. It's Thomas Reed, Petty Officer Reed, from 10 years ago. The old man paused. He wiped his hands on his apron and walked closer. He looked at Thomas's face, then at his boots. Commander Reed, Sal corrected, seeing the age and the bearing. You got old. We all did, Sal. Sal looked at Evelyn. He looked at her dirty coat, her desperate eyes, and the crude wooden box in her hand. You bringing me charity cases, Thomas? Sal asked, not unkindly but bluntly. I'm bringing you a colleague, Thomas said. Evelyn gasped slightly. Colleague? Is that so? Sal crossed his arms. Let me see the box. Evelyn stepped forward, terrified. This was a temple of her trade, and she was a heretic with a scrapwood kit. She placed the box on the counter. Sal opened it. He picked up the brush. A horsehair, Sal grunted. Good, synthetic scratches the grain. He picked up the wax. Kiwi, standard, a bit dry. He looked at her rags. Flannel, acceptable. He looked at Evelyn. You know how to strip a cordovan shell? Evelyn swallowed. No, sir. I've never touched cordovan. It's too expensive, but I know you don't use regular polish on it. You use a deer bone to smooth the ripples. Sal's eyebrows shot up. A deer bone? She reads books, this one? She knows her trade, Thomas said. Sal, Thomas continued, leaning on the counter, I need a favor. I need you to assess her work, a full inspection. Give her your worst pair of boots. I ain't running a school here, Sal grumbled. I'm not asking for a school, Thomas said. I'm asking for a test. If she passes, I want you to sell me the chair. Evelyn froze. Sal froze. The chair? Sal asked slowly. The brass stand in the corner, that's antique, Thomas. 1920s. Chicago station style. I know, Thomas said. It's gathering dust. You focus on repairs now. You don't have a shiner out front anymore. I'm too old to bend down, Sal admitted. Exactly, Thomas said. So sell me the chair and rent me 2 square feet of floor space by the window. Evelyn felt the room spinning. Rent. Buy. Mr. Thomas, she whispered, tugging his sleeve. You can't. That costs thousands. Thomas ignored her. He stared at Sal. Name your price." Sal looked at Thomas. He saw the desperation in the veteran's eyes. He realized this wasn't about shoes. This was about saving a life, and he wasn't sure whose life Thomas was trying to save. "First," Sal said, grabbing a pair of battered, salt-stained work boots from a shelf, "she works. If she ruins the leather, you pay for the boots and you get out." "Agreed," Thomas said. He turned to Evelyn. He knelt down so he was eye-level with her. "Evelyn," he said intensely, "this is the mission. You aren't begging anymore. You aren't hiding. You are going to take those boots and you're going to make them look like they belong on a general. Can you do that?" Evelyn looked at the boots. They were a disaster, cracked, dry, grey with neglect. Then she looked at Thomas. She saw the crushed white envelope sticking out of his pocket. She understood. He was betting on her. If she failed, the envelope came back out. If she succeeded, maybe, just maybe, he would stay. "I can do it," she said, her voice shaking but finding steel. "I need water, and I need Saphir Renovateur if you have it. The leather is thirsty." Sal grunted and pointed to a shelf. "Top shelf. Don't waste it. That stuff is liquid gold." Evelyn took off her oversized coat. Underneath, she wore a thin sweater that highlighted her fragile frame, but as she rolled up her sleeves, her movements became fluid. She took the boots. She sat on a small stool. She entered the zone. Thomas stood back, watching. He felt his heart rate elevate. It was the same feeling he got before a breach, the anticipation of the breach. Sal stood next to him. "You okay, Thomas?" Sal whispered. "You look like you're holding up a collapsing wall." "I'm just tired, Sal," Thomas whispered back. "She's a stray," Sal noted. "She's a fighter," Thomas corrected. They watched in silence for 20 minutes. Evelyn worked with a feverish intensity. She stripped the old wax. She conditioned the leather, massaging the cream in with her thumbs, finding the stress points. She applied the polish, layer after layer, circle after circle. Friction and heat, Thomas thought. That's what she said. Friction and heat. Finally, she stood up. She was sweating. Her hands were stained black. She placed the boots on the counter. They weren't just clean. They were resurrected. The deep gouges were blended in, looking like character lines rather than damage. The toes shone with a deep, lustrous glow. Sal picked up the left boot. He inspected the stitching. He checked the welt. He ran his thumb over the toe. It squeaked. He put the boot down. He looked at Evelyn over his glasses. "You missed a spot," Sal said sternly. Evelyn's face went white. Thomas stepped forward, ready to argue. "On the heel," Sal said, pointing to a microscopic dull spot. "But," he paused, "it's better work than I've seen from guys doing this for 30 years. He turned to Thomas. "The chair isn't for sale," Sal said. Thomas's shoulders slumped. The plan collapsed. The loop remained closed. "However," Sal continued, "I have a backlog of repairs 3 weeks deep. I need someone to prep the leather. Strip, clean, condition. If she can do the shine, I can focus on the soles." Sal looked at Evelyn. "I can't pay much, minimum wage, but you get tips, and you get to use the chair for your own customers when the shop is open. And," he grunted, "there's a storage room in the back, with a cot. It's warm, if you need to watch the shop at night." Evelyn covered her mouth with her blackened hands. A sob escaped her throat. It was a raw, ugly sound of pure relief. Thomas felt the tension in his chest snap. It was a physical release, like a cable being cut. "Sal," Thomas said, his voice thick. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Sal muttered. "Good help is hard to find, but she needs to clean up. She scares the customers looking like a chimney sweep." "I'll take care of that," Thomas said. He turned to Evelyn. She was crying silently, tears making tracks through the shoe polish on her cheeks. "Evelyn," Thomas said, "you have a job. You have a billet." "Thank you," she choked out. "Thank you, Mr. Thomas." "We're not done," Thomas said. A soldier needs a uniform. He checked his watch. 3:30 p.m. Come on, we have one more stop before we close the loop. He led her out of the shop, leaving her box behind on the counter. She didn't need the scrap wood anymore. She had the chair. As they walked back onto the street, Thomas reached into his pocket. He pulled out the crushed white envelope. They walked past a wire trash can on the corner. Thomas stopped. He held the envelope over the trash. Evelyn watched him, holding her breath. Friction and heat, Thomas said to himself. He didn't drop it, not yet. He put it back in his pocket. Evelyn's face fell. Why? She asked. Because, Thomas said, looking at her with a sad determination. The mission isn't over yet. I've secured your perimeter, Evelyn, but I haven't secured mine. He hailed a cab. This time he didn't wait. He stepped into the street, raising his hand with an authority that stopped a yellow taxi in its tracks. Get in, he said. Where are we going? To get you clothes that fit, Thomas said. And then I have to make a phone call.